the rest of the UK just now. You know, the Boris Johnson government, I think, is the worst possible thing for the UK. I represent Inverness as part of my constituency, and there we've had for the past 6 years, we were a pilot area, universal credit being rolled out. It's absolutely hammered people locally. We've gone from 1 food bank in Inverness up to 4. And that's been a process, and many more throughout the constituency have joined that. People have been driven into poverty by that particular policy, and it has terrible consequences with it as well, such as the rape clause and the 6-month rule for terminally ill people, which could be done away with, but they haven't done it as a Tory party. Now, what's going to happen, I think, with Boris Johnson and his majority, is that's going to get even worse. I think they're going to tighten the screw on the people who are most vulnerable in our communities, the disabled. I think the single parents, those people who just can't afford it. You know, I think this is going to be a really awful time with a Tory majority in place. And I think we will see more of what we already know about Boris Johnson, which is a pretty grim prospect.
With increasing support for the SNP, is it time to say goodbye to Scotland?
Well, we all know what you're going to say to that, don't we?
Well, I think there's a really important point that Grant Shapps made earlier tonight. He quite rightly said that, and I don't like this, but he quite rightly said that yesterday's election gave a mandate for Brexit in England. I've been against that. I think it would be best if the UK stayed in the EU as a whole, but I think he has been right. They got 43.6% of the vote and something like 56% of the seats. And he said that that was in the manifesto and they must take that forward. So I think it also follows that the SNP, who won 45% share of the vote in Scotland, who took 80% of the representatives and have in their manifesto and have for the last 4 elections that Scotland should have a choice over its future. It should be able to put whether or not Scotland wants to stay in a Boris Johnson broken Brexit Britain, or if it wants to take its own place as
OK, but you haven't mentioned that 54% of votes in Scotland supported the Union.
You know, we've just said, you know, look, this is about, we live in a parliamentary democracy where we have to fight elections based on our manifestos. That's what we did yesterday. The SNP won a thumping result yesterday, 80% of the seats in Scotland on a manifesto that said that Scotland should have a choice over its future. That's the important thing, not independence, because some people will agree and some people will disagree with independence. But the important thing is to listen to people and give them their choice over the future, to see whether or not they want to take one path or another. That's surely a democratic principle, and it's not up to anybody at Westminster, Boris Johnson or anyone else, to stop any of the members of the public in Scotland having their choice.
But hang on,
that's
all very well, and I'll come to you, Grant, in a minute, but we know that Boris Johnson has already, in fact, he's spoken in the constituency, said he is not going to allow her to do that. So what are you going to do about that? So what happens next?
The people in Scotland are sovereign. That's the way it should be. You know, if you look at all of what's happened over the past 3.5 years, the argument has been about what people...
I'm asking what you'll actually do
now.
We
are going to request a Section 30 order to make sure this is done as part of a legal
Boris Johnson has already said he's not going to do that. So what's going to happen?
Well, let's see, because we're going to put that in. We've said that we want to have a referendum to put a choice to the public. That's all it is, putting a choice to the public in 2020.
So are they going to get it?
No, I mean, look, it's hard to believe.
Not listening.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that we had a once-in-a-lifetime referendum in 2014, which would be a very short lifetime. And you know, the point to have this is, if you were going to campaign on a referendum basis, why did all your materials say this is the Stop Brexit election rather than they have a referendum election?
Our material all said about giving Scotland a choice over its future.
I know, but what I'm trying to understand, Drew, what I'm trying to understand is, given what Grant has said, and Boris Johnson has been very clear about it, he is not going to give permission from Westminster for a Section 30 for you to hold a referendum. What will you do instead?
Well, I believe it's completely untenable for any one politician, for anybody like Boris Johnson, to say what Scotland, what the people of Scotland can and cannot choose over the future.
But that is what he's doing.
We were promised, well, let me finish. Grant mentioned 2014. We were promised in the 2014 independence referendum that if we voted no to independence, then we would retain our place in the European Union, that we would be an equal partner in the United Kingdom, that we would be able to lead if we didn't leave. All that has proven to be absolutely false. And the people of Scotland are absolutely entitled to look at the situation as it is now and have a choice about how they want to take the future.
I'm just going to ask you one last time, and then I'm going to give up, because I'm not getting an answer. So what... No, I know. But all I'm saying is there are things that you could suggest, but given at the moment you're not being offered a Section 30, and there's no prospect... At the moment you get...
There has been no application.
Have you got a plan B?
Well,
have you got a plan B?
Well, Fiona, I think it's really important that the application hasn't been put in yet. I think Boris Johnson can't, in all seriousness, look at... don't think he can, in all seriousness, look at that and say that he's going to deny what is the democratic right of the Scottish people to choose their own future.
Stephen? Would Labour give a Section 30? Do you think that should happen?
I believe passionately in our union. And I think that it's a turbulent and dangerous world out there, and the United Kingdom is far better together, much stronger together. So I am not in favour of Scottish independence. I'm not in favour of Welsh independence. One of the reasons I regret my party's decision to back a second referendum is it made it much more difficult for us to have that discussion with
but if you wanted a second
people north of the border.
Do you think Scotland should get another referendum?
I think that referendum was for a generation. I accept that Brexit will make a big difference in terms of the economic... but I think that there is a constitutional imperative, which is a Section 30 has to be based on mutual agreement between the Westminster government and devolved government.
So you would deny the people of Scotland their choice?
I believe passionately in...
You would deny the people of Scotland their choice?
...of the United Kingdom is a code. The rules are the rules. It's just like with a referendum. When you go into a referendum and say, this will be for once in a generation, just as it was with the Brexit referendum, we need to obey and respect those rules. Because if you tear up the rules, then what is left? What's left for our democracy if you don't respect the rules?
Let's hear what people got to say. Yes, the man in the blue sweater there.
So if the Scottish people do get a second referendum, will the SNB stand by the result this time, if it's the same as it was last time?
OK, let me take a few, if you don't mind. Yes, the guy in the grey sweater there, yeah.
Drew, if Scotland did vote to leave the United Kingdom, would you have a hard border between England and Scotland?
Well, OK, I'm going to take one more, and then I'll let you answer. Yes, a woman in the red sweater there.
Mr Hendry, can you do you honestly think that Scotland could be self-sufficient outside of the UK financially?
Okay.
Do you want to come back on this?
Yeah, absolutely. They're all for me. I'll start in reverse order if I can. I think the idea that Scotland, with all of its resources, its people, you know, the natural resources it has, a country that's very similar in size in terms of population to Norway, uniquely, couldn't survive as an independent nation is, frankly, you know, it's nonsensical. The fact of the matter is that Scotland has a terrific wealth of opportunity, has a terrific wealth of, as I said, resources and great people there. Now, I could go into all the different aspects of that, but we don't have time since I've got 3 questions.
I know, but actually you need to answer them much more briefly, I'm afraid. I haven't brought anyone else in from the panel.
OK, and I don't think there's any need for a border. We have never wanted a border, and the reason we wanted to stay in the European Union is because of the free access that we've got. What we have with Brexit is we're obviously going to see a border down the... sorry?
Yeah. Ireland and Northern Ireland, then we should surely have a border between England and Scotland.
Well, look, you know, Ireland and the independent Ireland and the UK have had free movement of people since they became independent. It was part of the agreement they had over Irish independence.
We've left the EU now.
OK, hang on. Let's let Michael. And also, very briefly, I'm so sorry, but because I just need to bring other people in.
The final thing, I think, was standing by the result. Of course we stand by the result. The situation, as I've clearly said in 2014, changed radically over the past few years, and we put in our manifesto that, should that situation change, we would take the option back to the people. That's what we've done. We also, by the way, stood by the Brexit result. So the Scottish Government said, if you have to do Brexit, OK, we accept it. Here is the compromise we want that will look after Scotland. That was completely ignored.
Helen.
Look, I think the clue is in the name, Scottish National Party. People have been returning you into government in Holyrood now for a decade or more, and a majority of seats. I think that is a reasonable mandate to have another referendum. I do, however, think, to entirely take your point, that I think the case for independence is harder now. I think a hard border between England and Scotland is almost impossible to see how that would be managed, even with a common travel area, to look at it on customs terms. But I think the mandate is there.
I have to say that I disagree entirely, because referendums are just too important just to be given to the SNP at their whim. It's convenient for us. Now, the SNP have got a very clear policy, and it's a perfectly moral one, and there's nothing... I would fight you at a referendum because I love Scotland.
Well, let's have the referendum and we can fight it.
But we've had a referendum. and actually, I think we ought to just put the SNP's very good results yesterday into a little bit of context. 45% of the vote yesterday, excellent. But it was 50. But that means 55% of the vote was not for the SNP. And in 2015,
does that mean the Tories didn't win the election yesterday?
Drew, you're going to have to listen at some point in this debate. 2015, the SNP got 50% of the vote. So yesterday's good result was sort of scrabbling back to where they were at some point, some time ago. The SNP is not this overwhelming force which is knocking Scotland aside. It may already be past its high point.
OK, well, look...
Well, if 45% isn't enough to have a decent mandate, then you guys shouldn't be in government. I mean, it's good enough for you. Why isn't it good enough for them?